So, this happened about 4 or 5 years ago. For some context, my best friend, we'll call him Kyle, and I are pretty big into camping, but not the kind where you park your car next to a pre made fire pit and listen to the family in the next lot over. We like to get way out there, true isolation. We picked a spot in the Adirondacks using a trail map to find a place where we could hike deep into the woods and then go off trail. We ended up hiking about 5 miles in, then another mile or so through the brush until we came to this small lake. It wasn't on any of our maps, which was perfect. It felt like we were the only two people on the planet. We set up our tent just a few yards from the water, got a small fire going, and just took it all in. The silence out there, it's something else. The kind of quiet that's so absolute, you can almost hear a ringing in your ears. Hours went by. The sun went down and the fire started to burn low, casting these long, dancing shadows. It was probably around 10 p.m. We were just sitting there, not really talking, just staring out at the lake, which was like a sheet of black glass. That's when we saw it. On the complete opposite side of the lake, a light clicked on. A single, sharp beam from a flashlight. It was immediately jarring. We knew for a fact that there were no trails over there. It was just a thick, tangled wall of trees and jagged rocks that dropped straight down to the water. Our first thought, or hope, was that it was a lost hiker. But we kept watching, and that hope started to fade. The light wasn't bobbing around randomly like someone who was confused or looking for a path. It was moving steadily with a clear purpose, and it was moving around the perimeter of the lake. It was tracing the shoreline, and it was coming our way. It was moving unnervingly fast, way too fast for someone to be safely navigating that terrain in the dark. A cold feeling started to spread in my stomach. This person wasn't lost. They knew exactly where they were going, and they were heading directly for the only other point of light on the entire lake, our fire. I looked over at Kyle and he was already looking at me. His face was pale in the firelight. We didn't say a word. We didn't have to. We both felt the same primal sense of danger. In one silent, shared movement, we stood up. Kyle grabbed the small hatchet we used for firewood, and I grabbed my hunting knife from my belt. We left everything else. The tent, our sleeping bags, the food, all of it. We just backed away from the firelight and melted into the darkness of the woods. We ran, hunched over for maybe 50 yards until we found a thicket of bushes that was dense enough to hide us. We got down on our stomachs, lying in the cold dirt, and peered back through the leaves at our empty campsite. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. The weight was agonizing. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves made my heart jump into my throat. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, a figure stepped out of the tree line. He was a big man, not just tall, but broad, and in his hands, he was holding a shotgun. He didn't call out, he didn't say hello, or is anyone there? He just stood at the edge of our camp in the dying glow of our fire and scanned the area. He slowly swept the barrel of the shotgun back and forth from the tent to the woods and back again. He walked over to our tent and kicked it hard. Then he reached down, unzipped the flap, and began pulling our things out. Our backpacks, our sleeping bags, our clothes. He pulled everything out and piled it on the ground. Then, without a sound, he picked it all up, piece by piece, and tossed it onto the embers of the fire. He just stood there, motionless. He watched our gear start to smolder, then catch, melting the nylon and burning everything we'd brought with us. He stayed there for what must have been close to an hour, just staring into the flames with this completely blank, empty expression on his face. And then, just as quietly as he'd appeared, he turned around and walked back into the darkness he came from. We didn't move. We lay on the ground for at least another 2 hours, completely frozen, terrified that he was still out there, just waiting in the dark for us to show ourselves. Finally, when we couldn't take it anymore, we crawled out of the bushes. We didn't even go back to the campsite. We just turned and started hiking the 5 miles back to the car in the pitch black. It was the longest, most paranoid walk of my life. Every shadow looked like him. Every sound was him. We never went back for our gear. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he would have done if he'd found us in that tent. And that's the part that keeps me up at night. This happened a few years ago when I was working as a camp counselor at a summer camp in Ontario. It was around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and for some reason I just couldn't fall asleep. The air was dead still, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. All the campers were tucked away in their cabins up the hill, so I decided to head down to the dock to smoke a cigarette and just look at the stars for a bit. The lake was like black glass. It was perfectly flat, reflecting the moon in a way that felt almost artificial. I was sitting right on the edge of the dock, letting my feet dangle over the water, when I heard it. It was a faint, rhythmic sound. I squinted into the darkness, and that's when I saw a kayak gliding toward me. It was moving silently, no splashing, no heavy rowing, just the sound of water dripping off the paddle every time it broke the surface. As it got closer and moved into the moonlight, I realized there was a woman paddling. But something about her was immediately off. Her skin was incredibly leathery and deeply tanned, but in a way that looked fake, like a dried-out mask stretched over a skull. And her eyes, they were wide and completely unblinking. She looked almost prehistoric. She paddled right up to the very edge of the dock, coming to a stop just a few feet from my shoes. She didn't say hello. She didn't offer any explanation for why she was out on a private lake at 2 a.m. She just sat there, staring at me. After a few seconds of this heavy silence, she opened her mouth and spoke in this completely flat, monotone voice. She asked, "Are all the children safe in bed?" I felt my stomach drop. There was something so predatory and specific about that question. I immediately stood up and tried to put on my best authority voice, even though my hands were shaking. I told her, "You're on private property. You need to leave immediately." She didn't look scared. She didn't even blink. Instead, she slowly spread her lips into this wide, unnatural smile that showed way too many teeth. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "That's good, just as expected for this time." Then, without another word, she dipped her paddle back into the water, turned the kayak around, and glided back into the darkness. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of that night. I went and grabbed a baseball bat from the equipment shed and sat on the steps outside the kids' cabins until the sun came up. I was terrified she was going to come back to check on them herself. I never saw her again, but I still have no idea who she was or what she meant by this time. This happened years ago when my family and I would go camping every summer at this specific lake. My parents were really into fishing, so they'd usually stay by the water all day. My friend, who I'll call Sarah, and I would take our dog, a golden retriever named Buster, and go explore the trails. Buster was the friendliest dog you'd ever meet. He loved absolutely everyone. We were walking down this pretty narrow, wooded path, just enjoying the quiet, when Buster suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. The hair on his back stood straight up, and he started letting out this low, vibrating growl. I'd never heard him make a sound like that before. We looked up the trail, and standing about 30 feet away was a man. He had just stepped out of the bushes and was completely blocking our path. He was incredibly tall and skinny, wearing dirty, mismatched clothes that looked like rags, definitely not anything you'd wear for hiking. But the scariest part was his face. He was staring at us with his head tilted slightly to the side, and he had this massive frozen smile. It didn't reach his eyes at all. It looked less like a smile and more like he was just baring his teeth. He didn't speak. He just stood there for a long moment, watching us. Then he took a long, exaggerated step toward us. My friend and I immediately grabbed Buster's collar and started backing up, slowly at first. The man took another step, his smile never changing. We didn't wait around. We turned and sprinted back down the trail, running as fast as we could until we burst out into the clearing where our campsite was. When we breathlessly told my parents what we'd seen, they just brushed it off. They said it was probably just some weird local, or maybe someone who'd wandered off from another campsite. They told us not to worry about it. That night, Sarah and I were sharing a small 2-person tent. I remember falling asleep pretty quickly, exhausted from the run and the lingering fear. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It was pitch black inside the tent, but I could hear it. The distinct sound of crunching leaves. Someone was walking in slow, deliberate circles around our tent. The footsteps were heavy. My heart started hammering in my chest. I gently nudged Sarah awake. We both lay there, frozen, listening. The crunching continued, circling, and then it stopped. It stopped right next to my head. Through the thin canvas of the tent, I could hear heavy, raspy breathing. The man was standing inches away from my face, separated only by a thin sheet of nylon, just listening to us sleep. I remember thinking how close he must have been to actually touching the tent. Suddenly, Buster, who was sleeping in my parents' tent right next door, erupted in a frantic, guttural barking fit. The footsteps immediately crunched away into the woods, moving fast. The next morning, we found them. Large, muddy boot prints clearly visible in the dew-covered grass circling our tent. There were at least a dozen of them, forming a perfect ring around where our heads had been inside the tent. We packed up and left within the hour. My parents didn't argue this time. I never went camping at that lake again. To this day, the thought of that man standing silently outside my tent still makes my skin crawl.